The hope is for this whole display to continue standing all the way through the video. Hello my friends, welcome back to Ink and Fig. My name is Alex and today we are doing my January wrap up. I can't believe a whole month of 2023 is already over. Like, it has just gone so fast. I cannot believe how much reading I got done this month. What a way to start the year. After I had so many dud months at the end of 2022, I read 6 whole books in January. Now, some of these books are going to surprise you, some of them are not, and some of them you may not have heard of. So we're gonna talk about a little bit of everything today. Now, I am going to talk about the books a little bit out of order because I did actually read 2 different series. Who am I? I read 2 different series this year, and so I'm going to talk about the series together, just to keep things a little bit more organized, and I'll sort of tell you as we go in what order I read those. But, as usual, to start off with, let's talk about the books from my Lunar TBR that I did not read. To my shock and awe, I only actually didn't read one of the books that I had planned to read in January, and that is Black Leopard Red Wolf by Marlon James. Absolutely nothing against this book. I think that it's a very strongly written book. It's just that this is also one of the most dense books I have read in a while. So I burned out from this quite quickly. I got a 10th of the way through and I just sort of needed to take a break. So I'm planning on continuing this book throughout the year, but I'm going to continue going at it at a bit of a slower pace just so that I don't continue burning out with it, and so that I can really stop and absorb the story. What I noticed about this is that it's a lot of very deep, metaphorical, artistic language, and that for me tends to slow me up a little bit when I'm reading. So again, there's absolutely no shade against this book. It's just one of those ones that's going to take some more time for me to get through. All right, and now on to the stuff that I did read. So the very first book that I read in January, I started this in December and it was from my December TBR, but I finished it in January. That is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This book, in conjunction with Hellbent, which I'm going to be talking about in a moment, have sort of taken the world by storm at the moment, which of course, very timely, very expected. Hellbent was just released a couple of weeks ago, so like Bardugo is still even on tour, I think, touring that book, so like this is brand new news. I just happened to catch Ninth House right before Hellbent came out, so this was just like cosmically good timing. This book was kind of fun. What I'm noticing about Bardugo's work for me is that I have to, for the first book in any given series, I really have to get to the halfway point before I really care. And that was absolutely true with Ninth House as well. It took me until sort of that plot twist right in the middle, if you know, you know, before I was like, all right, yeah, I'm super invested in this. The front end of the book, I think, kind of suffered, and I think that may be true for much of her work, because it all sort of falls under the fantasy category, right? The front half of the book was in parts a little bit info dumpy, so that always breaks up a good pacing as far as I'm concerned. Like, the reader can tell what's going on, the author knows what's going on. It's sort of very thinly veiled what actually is happening here. And honestly, it kind of just pulled me out of it for the first half. I didn't really care what was going on. And then as soon as shit started to hit the fan and we started dealing with the ghosts in a new way, that was when I really fell in love with it. So Ninth House captured my heart by the end of it, and I was so glad by the end to know that Hellbent was on its way within a matter of days at that point. So I went, ordered it right away, and that is the next book I'm going to be talking about. This one was actually one of the last books that I read in January, just because of how the timing worked out with ordering it and waiting for it in the mail. As you can see, my copy is actually red, so I got the Indigo exclusive edition. I think it's gorgeous. I actually really like it better with the red than the basic dark gray. This book was absolutely wild. Like, we took everything that happened in Ninth House and just dialed it up to 11. I think we got a lot more character development, a lot more of Alex making some terrible decisions, and then flipping that around in a really good way. I cared so much about all of the characters in these books that, like, when certain things happened, I was very emotionally touched. I was sad, especially near the end. There were some things that happened, some people who are not going to be in the third book for various reasons. It just, wow. The way that she tied the prologue in with part 2 of the book knocked me out of the water. By the time I got there, I had completely forgotten about the prologue already. So I was just like, wait, what's going on? And then I was like, oh my god, these are the people from the prologue. And then I just like, absolute brain meltdown. Fantastic. So if you have not read Ninth House and Hellbent, like if you love Leigh Bardugo, 100% you're gonna love these. If you're not sure on Leigh Bardugo's works from the Grishaverse stuff, I would definitely recommend giving these a try because they are vastly different from the Grishaverse works, but they are so engrossing and so well thought out. And one thing I really noticed about these books is that they sort of really follow form after content. And what I mean by that is the main character, Alex, is absolutely not who you would expect for the heroine of what is considered a dark academia novel. She used to deal in drugs. She's not a particularly academic person. She's sort of a very gritty kind of character. And the book itself kind of reads like that. Like you pick it up and you go, yes, I'm going to read a dark academia. And then you pick this up and you're like, oh dear God, what's this? And that absolutely sells Alex's vibe. And I love that. I love it so much. I think it's so clever. It's such a good subversion of what can, I think, easily turn into a dry genre. Like, I love dark academia, don't get me wrong. I mean, look at me. But, like, I can find that it gets repetitive. The more dark academia you read, the more it gets repetitive. And this fresh take, fabulous main character. I, as a pansexual person, am attracted to every single person in these books. So if you're looking for some new book crushes, Ninth House and Hellbent. One of the books in January that I was the most excited to read was The Sleeping Car Porter by Suzette Mayer. This book just won the Scotiabank Giller Prize, which I am so proud of Mayer for because she is a wonderful person. She's an excellent writer, and I'm so glad that she finally got her time to shine with this, and what a book it was. Like this, I had no idea what to expect going into this, and frankly, with Suzette Mayer's work, I never know what to expect going into it. It always blows my expectations out of the water and just gives me something that I never even considered before. And The Sleeping Car Porter was absolutely no different. We follow our main character, Baxter, as he signs up for and undergoes a trip across Canada from, I believe it was Montreal to Vancouver. As you can probably tell from the cover, Baxter is Black. This is set in the 1930s, I think, 30s or 40s. The sleeping car porters are the people who basically take care of the train car and attend to guests' needs on the course of an overnight trip. Typically, this job was taken on by Black men because it was considered a very bottom of the rung job. And these guys absolutely suffered. They ate horrific food. They had to pay, like over the course of this several day trip, he had to pay for every single one of his meals from the dining car. And like, on one hand, from a capitalist perspective, I understand, but on the other hand, I was like, fucking feed these guys, you know what I mean? They get no sleep, so one of the major themes of this book is actually sleep deprivation, so we end up going into some really interesting, like, hallucination sequences in here, which I thought was very neat. On top of all of that, like, outside of just the horrors of the job, he has to deal with a 99% white guest list. And it's just so upsetting how terribly white people treat people of color, just like in general, but just like this book just highlighted some sort of like casual racism, actual racism. Like, it was just a very upsetting thing. Now, to boot on all of this, Baxter's gay. And in the 1930s, that is not a good look. He's guarding a number of secrets and he's trying to get all this done. And then the train breaks down. Like, and that's not a spoiler because it's in the general book summary. So not a spoiler, but he has to undergo all of these various problems as the train breaks down in the middle of nowhere. So this book was a wild ride. There is so much to chew on from this book, from like a literary perspective, from a cultural contextual perspective. There's just so much in this to think about. So if you're looking for something that's got a lot to make you think, and just something that's got beautiful writing and a really good story. Highly, highly recommend this book. So the next book that I want to talk about in a very careful way. This book is a debut novel. It's a self-published book by a local Calgary writer. I met her in person and she was absolutely lovely. She was very excited about this book. I could tell that she put a lot of heart and soul into this. That's why I was so excited to read it. So I got a copy and she signed it for me. She was absolutely lovely. And then in January, I finally read it. This book was very, very not good. Everything about this book was underdeveloped, underwritten, and not fully realized in the way that it could have been. Because it's a self-publish, I can tell that this wasn't gone over with a terribly fine-tooth comb. I don't know how many beta readers were behind this project, but I don't think it was enough, and I think this really could have benefited from the use of a copy editor, to be completely honest, because there were grammatical mistakes every 5 minutes in this, which was not great from like a pacing perspective, because each of those grammar issues for me caught me up as I was reading because my brain catches on to those things. That's just how I'm wired. But over and above that, just the quality of the writing here was not good. The way that I have framed it to myself is that this is the quality of writing that I was putting out as a teenager as a first draft. And this very much has first draft vibes. It's really difficult to talk about because I could absolutely tear this apart if I really wanted to, and I really don't want to because clearly someone tried. The author really tried to make this a good thing, and she put a lot of effort into it. And I just feel really bad that like her beta readers and her friends who clearly read this, I can tell from the reviews that they did read it. I just feel really bad that they would let her get far enough to actually release this into the world, because honestly, I think that's a disservice to her. Yeah, it's just a very sad thing to see. I'm only going to show you this for a couple of minutes because again, I really don't want to rip on this book too hard because I frankly just feel bad about it. The book that I'm talking about is Spark by Y.C. Leung. I will not be rereading this. My new challenge is going to be having these books not fall over while I talk about the last one. Coffee cup. Oh god. Longtime viewers of the channel will know that I have had a bit of an antagonistic relationship with the next book. I don't know what force of the universe drove me to finally read this book, but it's happening, and it has in fact happened. I finished it. That book is The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. I'll just give you a second to absorb the fact that I finally finished this. I could not tell you how many of my TBRs this book ended up in last year, but it was several. And I've had this book in my possession. This book does not belong to me, for those of you who are new to the chat. This book belongs to a friend of mine. I borrowed it before the pandemic in February 2020. Or January 2020 even. Like, I've had this book for 3 years and I only just now finished it. The story was fine. The characters were reasonably well developed. I was very upset at the end for various and assorted reasons. I'm gonna be completely honest with you, there was a graphic scene of breaking bones in this, which for me, as someone with a disability that involves breaking bones, was extremely triggering. So as per usual, if you're gonna go into the Poppy Wars series, be aware that there are a lot of freaking trigger warnings in these books. No matter where you're sitting on the trauma spectrum, there's something in here for you, believe you me. Now the problem that I have with the whole Poppy Wars series is the fact that these are so deeply steeped in military strategy, and the realness and the mundanity of that kind of lifestyle. Like, it is not all flash and bang fighting and taking territory and this, that, and the other thing. There's a lot of boring planning that goes along behind it, and there's a lot of management and like governing that goes behind these kinds of movements. And that's a huge part of these books, and I just cannot get behind it because I just find it extraordinarily boring. So that's the main problem that I had with these. I think that these kinds of books, or this series of books, is best for people who either have a military history, or appreciate that sort of more real historical kind of story, rather than going into these looking for a fantasy story. Because although it is a fantasy story and there is a really good magic system in here, the bulk of these books is political governance and war strategy. There's really no two ways about it, and for me, that's just not the vibe. So these books, not a pass for me. All right, the coffee cup is back where it belongs. The last book that I read, and in fact, the last book that I finished in January, is The Burning God, once again by R.F. Kuang. So it took me 3 years to read The Dragon Republic, and then I just slam out The Burning God in 6 days like it's nothing. Like, now you'll notice that I do not have it physically, and there's a reason for that. I actually got it from my library as an audiobook so that I could force myself through it. So I ended up listening to it. I ended up taking walks at lunch and listening to this book, and I managed to slam through the whole thing in 6 days, which is great because, again, we were absolutely run down with military strategy and governance and, like, just the boring stuff of war, which is fine. If you're into that stuff, I am super not. There were only a couple of basic plot points in The Burning God that I actually cared about. That said, The Burning God is also the end of the series, so we got the whole wrap up in the last it really was the last 2 chapters that everything boiled down, and like we were kept guessing right until the end. And the ending, I thought, wrapped the whole thing up so well. And what kind of bothered me was that really none of that military strategy and all of that boring stuff that I hated about the books mattered at the end. It was all about the characters, and it was all about their journey, and Rin's journey specifically, but also Naja and Kitai and all of them, and they all played into how this ended and how it shook out. And there was a lot of allusion to, I don't know if it was a real game or like a game that was sort of fictionalized based on a real game for that, but it kind of boiled down to chess, but more complicated. And those allusions to that game really showed how the book ended up turning out. And it was a lot about like cycles and the gods and how the gods conceive of the universe and how the universe works. And I actually found it quite interesting because it kind of reminded me a little bit of how the story of Ragnarok shook out in Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology, which is a weird parallel to draw, but that's the parallel I'm going to leave you with. Ultimately, I'm glad I finally finished the series, but I super won't be returning to them. That said, I am absolutely stoked to read Babel still. If you've seen a couple of my other videos, it usually sits behind me up on a shelf. I'm so stoked to finally get to that book. And now I finally have the freedom to go ahead and do that now that I've knocked a couple of these other things off the docket. So to wrap this all up, I'm going to give you the star ratings that I neglected to give you at the beginning of the video. Ninth House, I rated 4 stars. Hellbent got a 4.5. The Sleeping Car Porter got 5 stars. Spark unfortunately came out with 1 star. The Dragon Republic came out with 3 stars, and The Burning God came out with 3.5 stars. I'm so happy to be done all of these. I can't believe I started off the year with 6 whole reads. That is absolutely wild to me. I'm so proud of myself right now. I can't even begin to explain. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you all being here. We just passed 200 subscribers, which is absolutely wild to me. Thank you so much for joining in. It truly means the world to me. If you have not yet joined the party, go down there and hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell so that you know when I upload. We can beat the algorithm together. Leave a like and a comment if you feel so moved so that other people can come join the party. And then go ahead and follow me on all of my social media at Ink and Fig and on Instagram at Ink and Fig Reads to see what I'm reading. That is it for today. Thank you once again so much for joining me today, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.